Fellas, we just got done with UFC 306, O'Malley and Merab. A couple of good fights on the card, a couple of snooze fest. I'll do a proper matchmaking breakdown tomorrow, but today we're going to be matchmaking every main card fighter after UFC 306. Every single fighter that won or lost on the main card, I'm going to be matching them into a fight that I think makes the most sense next. Like I said, I'll do a proper recap and review of the card tomorrow, but for now, I'm going to be matchmaking every main card fighter. It was a really good card, though, and I've got a lot to say about the event, in which will come in tomorrow's video, but for the first main card fight, it was Osborne taking on Ronaldo Rodriguez. Listen, I always said in Fight Week this shouldn't have been on the main card, but you know what? At least they went out there and performed and didn't put on a snooze fest. It was a really good fight. Osborne fumbled the finish so badly so many times. Ronaldo Rodriguez made a massive comeback. It was a really fun fight between two flyweights, and even though I still think it shouldn't have been on the main card, if we're talking how good the fight was, it was one of the best fights on the entire card. Ronaldo Rodriguez got a decision. I've heard a couple of people being a bit iffy with the decision, but we'll start off with Osborne now. Even though he's a dangerous guy in some senses, and he was really close to finishing Ronaldo Rodriguez, he has lost more fights than he's won in the UFC. I think he's lost 2 more fights than he's won. So I think for him, we give him a more lower level fight that's still winnable, but not someone that's, you know, not someone that's too high up in the, well, not just too talented. So I'm going to do Osborne versus Carlos Hernandez. Now, Carlos Hernandez, he's only had a couple of wins in the UFC, obviously Bondal being one of them. Recently lost to Tatsuro Taira and Rey Cesaro. But I think Carlos Hernandez is tough. He's got that good Mexican wrestling style, which he showed against Rey Cesaro. And I think he could be a good test for Osborne. Osborne's faced a lot of these top guys, and even in a lot of his losses, he looks pretty good as well. And even when he lost, even when he beat Charles Johnson, he looked good, and that's a win that stayed really well for Osborne. I think we should do him versus Carlos Hernandez. I think if Osborne can't get past somebody like Carlos Hernandez, who's not the highest level talent in the flyweight division, that's where we potentially start talking about Osborne maybe even getting cut from the UFC, because I was thinking coming into this fight, maybe we'll cut him, but I feel a bit guilty cutting him in after a performance like that. So I think we keep Osborne around, give him somebody like Carlos Hernandez, another lower level flyweight on the roster, who had a good start to his UFC career, but has kind of been fading early in his couple of fights. So Carlos Hernandez, Osborne, a low level flyweight fight. Loser maybe gets cut from the contract, cut from the UFC, and that's what I think should happen for Osborne. But I still think he's got the danger factor. He nearly finished Rodriguez in that fight, so I don't think it's fair to kind of just cut him from the UFC straight away. And for Ronaldo Rodriguez, 2-0 in the UFC, well, 2-1 in the UFC because he lost on the Contender Series a few years ago. Good comeback in front of Mexico. I think we do Ronaldo Rodriguez versus Alexandro Costa. It's a tough fight for Ronaldo Rodriguez. It's really where we get to see how good he is, because he didn't look amazing in this fight previous to the fight with Osborne, and even in that fight with Osborne, he was seconds away from getting finished multiple times, and he lost on the Contender Series a few years ago. So I've still got a lot of questions regarding Ronaldo Rodriguez, and I feel like the only way we can get these questions answered is if we see him against a decent flyweight. So I want to see him against Alexandro Costa. Costa's got no fights booked. He's had a couple of fights against top guys like Steve Erceg, but he has got a couple of good wins in the UFC. He's a dangerous guy, Alexandro Costa as well. I think we're doing Ronaldo Rodriguez versus Alexandro Costa. Again, don't want to put him anywhere near the rankings when he hasn't really displayed that he's the highest level talent in the UFC so far. I still think we need to kind of test with Ronaldo Rodriguez, do him versus Alexandro Costa. If he can beat Alexandro Costa, that's where you want to be matching him up against the guys like, Charles Johnson and a couple of the other good flyweights that don't happen to be ranked, and then we maybe see him face a ranked opponent. But Ronaldo Rodriguez, let's test him against Alexandro Costa, see how good he really is, see if he's a fraud, see if he's actually pretty talented, and I think it's a good fight for Alexandro Costa as well. Ronaldo Rodriguez has quite a bit of hype. He's 2-0, well, he's on 2-fight winning streak, so Costa, Ronaldo Rodriguez, I think we do that as well. And for Alexandro Costa, I know he's coming off a win, but it doesn't really make sense to fight in the rankings when the 2 ranked fighters he has fought, he has lost to. So Ronaldo Rodriguez, Alexandro Costa, I think that's what the first main card fight should do next. And then we've got Danzelba versus Esteban Ribovics. I mean, I just talked about Osborne versus Ronaldo Rodriguez being a fight of the night. This might have been the fight of the year. The third round between Danzelba and Ribovics might have been one of the best third rounds I've seen in a while. This fight of the, give him like a 100k bonus. I know Dana White said he doesn't like doing these big bonuses anymore, but if there's one fight that deserves a bonus, it's this. This has potential to be the fight of the year 2024 out of every single fight that took place in the UFC. It was a banger. We had Danzelba nearly finishing Ribovics. We had Ribovics nearly finishing Danzelba. Constant striking, high action between the both of them, high output as well. Such a good fight. Fight of the night, in my opinion, between the two of them, and I think they both deserve a massive bonus. But we'll start off with Danzelba. He fell short, but he's still a very talented striker. And he, in that second round specifically, he did have a lot of success against Ribovics, obviously, before the danger kicked in. So I think we need to give him a fight that he can bounce back on, because he's a talented fighter and he's still got a lot of potential. So I think we do Danzelba versus Jai Herbert. Jai Herbert, again, he's kind of just there in the UFC. He's not really got a career going for him. He joined the UFC, didn't have the most talent. He's lost a couple of times, got flatlined by Taporia. He hasn't looked great in his last 3 fights. I mean, to be fair, in his last fight against Bedoya at UFC, I think it was Abu Dhabi, He did look pretty good in that, but again, Bedoya was, I think, Bedoya just wasn't the best talent in the coming into the UFC at that time. I think it was 0-2 in the UFC at the time of facing Jai Herbert. So I think we do Jai Herbert versus Daniel Zelluba. If Daniel Zelluba can get past somebody like Jai Herbert, who does seem to be improving in his last couple of fights, despite them not being the best performances, I think it shows us that Daniel Zelluba's got a lot of potential. Now, again, I think it is quite a not an easy fight, but a fight that he can kind of bounce back on if he is able to beat Jai Herbert. Gives him that experience, gets him some momentum, and for Jai Herbert, if he can beat Daniel Zelluba, that's a fairly big name on his resume. He starts getting Jai Herbert some momentum to go on a bit of a, I don't know, I'm not going to say go on a bit of a run, because like I said, Jai Herbert's kind of just there in the UFC. He doesn't really have anything going for him, but I think we do Daniel Zelluba versus Jai Herbert, gets Daniel Zelluba back on track, and I think it could actually be a fun striking matchup. Jai Herbert versus Bedoya was a really good fight. Daniel Zelluba's a really fun was a really fun prospect, and he just had a fight of the year against Hrgović. So Jai Herbert, Daniel Zelluba should be a fun fight, and it's a good test for Daniel Zelluba. And then we've got Hrgović. Really, really impressive performance against Ronaldo Rodriguez. Really impressive performance against Daniel Zelluba. Fight of the year. Probably going to be out for a while. Nearly finished him in that first round. I think we need to give him a big fight. I think we do Esteban Hrgović versus Thiago Moises. I don't want to rush Hrgović too quick. I don't want to give him anybody like Drew Dober or any of these just immediately left the rankings type of fight. I don't want to give him like a Bobby Green or anything just yet. I want to still test how good Esteban Hrgović is, because he has had some good wins in the UFC. Had a really impressive performance just then against Zelluba. Before that, he sent Terence McKinney to the Shadow Realm. I think we do him versus Thiago Moises. Thiago Moises is a tough motherfucker, and I feel like he's a good lightweight again to test Hrgović. If he can beat Thiago Moises, it gets to the point where we start matching him up against the guys that are going to potentially give him one fight away from getting into the rankings or fighting a ranked fighter. So Thiago Moises, it's a tough fight for Hrgović, and I think it could be a good fight to test how good he is and how well-rounded he actually is in the UFC, because we're not just giving him another pure striker. We're giving him Thiago Moises, a guy who's going to mix it up, a guy who's dangerous everywhere, a guy who's fought a lot of these top guys, and a good test for Esteban Hrgović. So I think we do Hrgović versus Thiago Moises, and if he can beat Thiago Moises, that's where I think we do him potentially against I don't know, somebody like Drew Dober or Bobby Green, one of these unranked lightweights who can, give him a ticket to get in a ranked fight. So Hrgović, Thiago Moises, but to be honest, I just want to see Hrgović back again after that performance. I just want to see Hrgović and Zelluba back in the octagon. I wouldn't even mind if they run it back again. That was the fight of the year, one of the best fights I've seen this year in 2024. But I would do Hrgović versus Moises and Zelluba versus Jai Herbert. Then we have Brian Ortega versus Diego Lopez. Diego Lopez securing the title shot by getting a decision win over Brian Ortega. Brian Ortega's been hinting a move to 155. I really don't like that idea. I'd much rather see Brian Ortega stay at 145, especially after that performance. Not that it was necessarily a bad performance, but if he's looking like that at 145, he's going to get murdered at 155. But we'll start off with, Jai Herbert. Sorry, not Jai Herbert. We'll start off with Brian Ortega, what I think he should do next. Again, like I said, moving to 155 shouldn't be an option. I think he should stay in the featherweight division and face Josh Emmett. I don't know why Josh Emmett's been out for a while. He's probably got an injury, but he obviously got that really, really brutal knockout over Bryce Mitchell at UFC 296 last year in December. Hasn't been booked since. He's probably been injured or something like that, and obviously previous to that, got submitted by Yair Rodriguez and absolutely demolished by Ilia Topuria. So both of these guys are in the same position. They're never going to fight for a belt. They're never going to be, they are top featherweights, I guess, but they're never going to be, top number one contenders or title challenges. They're both just going to be there in the top 10 to be put into fun fights, and I feel like what better way than putting them against each other. They haven't fought each other yet. They're both, Josh Emmett's coming off a win, Brian Ortega's coming off a loss. They're both similar, they're not too far in the rankings. I think it's a very fun fight as well. You've got Brian Ortega, a guy who's improved his technical boxing, not the best boxer by any means, but he's improved his technical boxing, obviously has that jiu-jitsu, has that heart, against Josh Emmett, who's arguably the most powerful dude, probably shouldn't be arguable, he's probably the most powerful dude right now at 145. I think this is also a banger. Josh Emmett's usually involved in fun fights, Brian Ortega's usually involved in fun fights. I can definitely see this getting ended at the finish. I mean, Josh Emmett got submitted by Yair Rodriguez, but I can also see him landing a massive shot on Brian Ortega and putting his lights out just like Diego Lopez nearly did in that first round. So I would do Brian Ortega versus Josh Emmett, and I think the winner of this fight, maybe you put them against somebody like Arnold Allen, or maybe if Arnold Allen fights Yair Rodriguez, you give him another, maybe not another fight with Yair Rodriguez, but you know what I mean. Give him a top featherweight, not necessarily a number one contender fight, but I just think we should do Josh Emmett versus Brian Ortega. I think it makes the most sense, especially for where they're ranked and how they've been looking recently. Brian Ortega versus Josh Emmett. And then for Diego Lopez, I think there's only one answer, and it's a title shot against the winner of Ilia Topuria versus Max Holloway. The 145 title picture right now has become so interesting. I mean, I liked it when Volkanovski was the champion, but now we've got Ilia Topuria as the champion taking on Max Holloway, the best title fight right now in the UFC. And then Diego Lopez, who the UFC are obviously going to give the winner. They're not going to give the winner of Sterling and Evloev the winner, are they? So I think Diego Lopez, it's without a doubt give him a title shot. Got the knockout over Sadiq Youssef, got the win over Dan Ige, and just got a really impressive win over Brian Ortega. I think he's now ranked number 3 in the division, and he's got to be next for a title shot. Whether it's Diego Lopez versus Ilia Topuria, whether it's Diego Lopez versus Max Holloway, sign me up. The featherweight title picture right now seems to be delivering. It seems to be one of the most interesting, if not the most interesting title picture right now in the UFC. And Diego Lopez, he's past it. He's not just a hype train. He's going to be fighting for a belt in his next fight, and I can't wait to see it. So Diego Lopez, he's earned his spot to fight for a belt. Give him the winner of Ilia Topuria and Max Holloway after UFC 308. Book that fight next year, and I'll be there to see it because I can guarantee it's going to be a banger. But all 3 of these guys are always involved in fun fights. So we'll do Lopez versus the winner of Topuria and Holloway. Then the core main event, Alexa Grasso versus Valentina Shevchenko. Not the most interesting of fights, and I'll talk about that tomorrow. But Valentina Shevchenko, I will admit, it was a dominant fight. 5 rounds to Valentina Shevchenko. The only time she was ever in trouble was a couple submission attempts from Alexa Grasso, which she didn't get. And she's now the champion. But Alexa Grasso, still one of the top in the world, and I think she has got a bright future. Well, not necessarily a bright future because she has just lost a belt, but I still think she's always going to be a top in her division. I think she should face the winner of Namajunas and Blankfield. I think that's definitely the fight to make next. Namajunas and Blankfield, they're obviously not going to fight for the belt next because they both lost to Furot, who is going to be fighting next against Valentina Shevchenko, which I'll talk about in a second. But they're now matched up in a fight night main event later this year, and I think the winner of that fight should be put into a number 1 contender fight, or at least not necessarily a number 1 contender fight, because I don't want to see Grasso face Shevchenko again, but a fight that if they can beat Grasso gives them a title shot, because I think Alexa Grasso versus Namajunas would be a fun fight to see. Another former champion against Alexa Grasso. Namajunas at this point in time, she would have been on a 3-fight winning streak if she can beat Blankfield. And Erin Blankfield had a really good run up, lost to Furot, didn't look the most impressive, but if she can beat a former champion in Rose Namajunas, and then she can go on to beat a former champion in Alexa Grasso, I think there's no questions asked that Blankfield faces the winner after that of Furot and Shevchenko. So I think the winner of Namajunas for Blankfield perfectly steps up a fight for Alexa Grasso. Completely different style to what she's used to. Well, it depends who she fights really, because if she ends up against Erin Blankfield, that could be a stylistic tough fight. But I think she could smoke her on the feet. But either way, Alexa Grasso versus Namajunas and Blankfield I think should be next. Now for Valentina Shevchenko, I've already said it. Give her Furot. Furot, I think she's undefeated in the UFC as well. And I think she definitely earned a spot. Beat Namajunas at UFC Paris a couple of years ago. Recently got that good win over Erin Blankfield. I'm going to be honest, Blankfield, like I said, didn't look good in that fight, but she still got the win. She's definitely earned a shot next against Valentina Shevchenko. And I think this could be an interesting fight considering how good Furot has looked, specifically on the feet. I do think Shevchenko does take this fight in hand. Furot, her first loss in the UFC. But yeah, Furot's earned a spot. Beat Namajunas, beat Blankfield. Shevchenko, Furot should be next, in my opinion, for Shevchenko. And then the main event, Sean O'Malley versus Merab. Yeah, Merab dominated Sean O'Malley. There's no 2 ways about it. Merab went out there and dominated Sean O'Malley. Might have not been the most interesting fight to see. I mean, it wasn't as bad as Shevchenko and Grasso, to be fair. But yeah, Merab did his thing. Completely outgrappled Sean O'Malley. O'Malley couldn't get going on the feet either. So for Sean O'Malley, I would like to see him versus Corey Sandhagen next. I always said this is a fight that I really want to see in the bantamweight division. And I feel like now's the perfect time to make it. O'Malley's not the champion. Unless the UFC are really, really salty, they're not going to give him an immediate rematch. That's definitely going to go to someone else who I'll talk about in a second. But yeah, Sean O'Malley, I think him versus Sandhagen makes a lot of sense. They're both some of the top bantamweights in the world, just not good enough to get the belt. Obviously, Umar beating Corey Sandhagen, Merab beating Sean O'Malley. So I think we do Sean O'Malley versus Corey Sandhagen. A really good fight. Kind of always been a fantasy fight of mine in the bantamweight division that we've never got to see. And after Sandhagen lost to Magomedov, I was kind of worried that we aren't going to see this fight. But it's the perfect time to see. You've got Sean O'Malley. Maybe his last performance didn't see that, but it's a completely different style to Sandhagen. But usually is one of the most dangerous, one of the most calculated, and one of the best strikers in the bantamweight division against someone else who, again, is another high-level striker in the bantamweight division who also has the ability to mix it up and make it dangerous. Corey Sandhagen versus Sean O'Malley, really dangerous fight, but also a win because, they're both some of the top bantamweights in the world. A win over each other could easily push them straight back into that title picture and title talks, and it wouldn't surprise me if Sean O'Malley was able to beat somebody like Corey Sandhagen. The UFC, knowing how popular Sean O'Malley is and how he's the cash cow, would probably just give another title shot if he was able to beat Corey Sandhagen. So I think we do O'Malley versus Sandhagen. on some sort of pay-per-view, maybe like a pay-per-view co-main event. That is a banger right there. We haven't seen it so far, and I really want to see it, and I think now's the perfect time to make it. And then for Merab, there's only one name, and it is Umar Magomedov. I'm actually really excited for this fight because we're having a break from the whole grappler versus striker. We saw Magomedov against Corey Sandhagen. The narrative was it was a grappler versus striker. We saw Merab and O'Malley, same thing, grappler versus striker. But now we're going to see two of the highest level grapplers right now in the bantamweight division going at it, which I'm really interested to see. You've got Umar Magomedov just went out there, completely out-wrestled Corey Sandhagen like he has to every single other opponent in the UFC. You've got Merab, out-wrestled O'Malley, dominated Yan, dominated another wrestler in Henry Cejudo. They're both on massive winning streaks, and I think this is the fight to make next. I think Umar Magomedov has definitely earned his shot. It is the fight that should be taking place next in the bantamweight division, and I think it's going to be interesting to see how, like I said, their grappling complements each other, because I can't necessarily see one of them dominated in the grappling department. I think Umar Magomedov is going to do a really good job at keeping it on the feet and outboxing Merab, but again, you can't really underestimate Merab, especially after that performance. I mean, I picked O'Malley to win. He completely shut down O'Malley, so yeah, Merab versus Umar Magomedov doesn't really need much explanation. It should be next in the bantamweight division. But that is me matchmaking every single main card fighter after UFC 306. Let me know your thoughts on these fights and the whole UFC 306 card as a whole. Like I said, I will be doing a proper breakdown of the card and a proper recap tomorrow when I talk about the best and the worst things. But those are my matches for UFC 306. Let me know your thoughts. Thank you for watching.